As always, I like to start with the bombshell. It's a good way to kind of shake things up and, ensure that the people are going to watch it, the people who actually want to watch the video. So, I rated this game higher than Mega Man X1. Trust me, no one's more surprised by that than me. Okay, bombshell dropped. Just lost half my subscribers. That's cool, because I was so nervous walking into this one. I was actually, jittery. I was, a little shaky. It's like, oh my god. And here, let me explain why. One of the things I've noticed, and if you've been watching this series, you've seen this happen multiple times, is that I go back to something I either watched a lot or played a lot and feel like I remembered enjoying, and there's only two outcomes to that. It's either much worse than I remember, and there's some other mitigating circumstance why I was playing it, aka it was the only Mega Man game I had, like with Mega Man 7 or Mega Man X3, or because of the fact that it's actually really good, and it's actually even better than I thought it was. And these are the only two options, right? It's either much worse or much better. And so I'm staring at Mega Man 5, and I used to replay the hell out of Mega Man 5. In fact, Mega Man 5 was the first time I ever did speedruns or challenge runs. Now, you're probably thinking, but you did this stuff in Mega Man, like you did the no-hit challenge. Yeah, after Mega Man 5 introduced the concept to me. In fact, I want to give a shout out to a friend of mine, except I don't like to drop names in these, but he was a buddy of mine. He was like, hey, do Buster only in Mega Man 5. I was like, yeah, okay. So I did it. It was a little rough, especially on some of the bosses. Darkman 4. And then I get through and it's like, that was really fun. That kind of, and that's the whole point, right? That's what challenge runs and speed runs are really about. They add a new dynamic and a new layer to games you already enjoy. Or, there's other things too that can go to. But for me, that's what speedruns and challenge runs are really great for. For me personally, it's like I love going back and saying, well, how can I beat Final Fantasy VI but only use one character? I love doing the single character challenge and stuff like that. So that all started with Mega Man 5, and then I went back and started doing stuff for the previous games and so forth and so on. And the Buster Only challenge has stuck with me ever since. But even I was surprised that Mega Man 5 was able to surpass X1. And you might think on the surface, how is that even possible? Like, X1 has the dash, and it has the great boss design, it has amazing music. Well, yes, but Mega Man 5 has incredible escalation of difficulty, some of the best level design I've ever seen in the entire franchise, and really excellent enemy variety. Whereas X1 does this, and this better than 5. 5 does this, and this better than X1. And the two end up actually being pretty close to each other in the end. But one of the things that I take into account when it comes to the golden number is density. There's actually a lot I take into account when it comes to the golden number. But density is exactly what it sounds like. How much good happens in what time? Now, there's other factors. There's a lot of other factors. But that is exactly why Mega Man 5 surpasses X1 for me. Just barely. Because while X1 is like, yes, there's also moments of, okay. And then there's Mega Man 5, which is, yes! And then you beat the game. There's no moment of frustration. There's no moment of irritation. There's no point at which the game pisses me off or makes me want to stop playing it or make me go, okay, I'll get through this section to get to the next section. And I think that right there is the biggest reason that kind of nudges 5 above X1 for me. Now, having said all that, I'm sure everyone is just going to descend upon me with sticks, and like I said, I just lost half my viewer base, and that's fine. Because anybody who watched the stream knows, after I saw the result, after I plugged in all the numbers and ran through the various formulas and saw the resultant golden number, I stared at that and I just sat staring at it for 40 seconds, processing in my head, is that real? And I really like, and you know me, I like complex solutions. I like complex nuances. We need to look below surface details. And so I was trying to process why that would happen. And like I said, it does make a degree of sense due to not only the density thing, but Mega Man 5 does a lot of things I value very, very right. This is also an incredibly polished game. While Mega Man 4 was certainly a polished product, this is just beautifully crafted. I think we encountered a grand total of 2 issues the entire game. One was the fact of how the rush coil works, which I'll describe more in detail later, because it's possible to clip through it thanks to the fact that it's kind of got its own separate platformy collision. And the other was the slowdown, which was starting to show because, let's be honest, the SNES was already out at this point. In fact, they were already working on X1 when they were working on Mega Man 5. And Mega Man 5's level design does a lot of the same thing that X1's does. Huh. I'm serious about this. I actually legitimately think that Mega Man 5 and Mega Man X1 shared ideas and concepts extensively between each other. In fact, a lot of the weapons in Mega Man 5 feel like X1 weapons to me. Especially in how not just useful they are, but how they kind of started pushing the envelope a little bit and were better iterations of previous ideas of weapons. Oh, sure, we could toss up the Rain Flush like in Mega Man 4, or we can just get rid of all the enemies on the screen and fling them up into the air. Oh, sure, we can have a top spin, which is terrible for reasons already described, or we can do the charge slide, which fixes all the problems with the top spin and is just a better implementation of the same concept. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but you can kind of see how several of these weapons feel similar in style and in design to the X1 weapons. And considering it's the same damn team working at the same damn time, that makes sense to me. And again, the level design. So I want to toss out a couple of examples. As usual, if you want the full examples, that's what the stream's there for. But I want to toss out a couple of specific examples. Mega Man 5 does a beautiful difficulty escalation. There's only a couple bumps in the road, which I'll mention later. The way it works is, I hate to praise something that should be standard, but it's kind of rare, and even if it's standard, that doesn't have anything to do with its quality, as I like to say. Something that's standard can be bad or good or anything in between, right? So the standard game design approach should be introduce, escalate, finalize. Introduce, escalate, finalize. And you have this rhythm of 3 beats between the theme, as we've talked about before when it comes to level design. Now, we've seen several of these games have done this kind of theming very well, and X1 does this very well as well. Mega Man 5 does this in almost every single stage. There's only a couple of stages that don't, like Napalm Man kind of falls through the cracks a little bit there. But each stage is like, here's an idea. You've got the gravity, okay, and there's a couple of spikes, okay, and then there's a couple of spikes above you. Okay. Now there's enemies and spikes and deceptively difficult jumps. Mega Man 5 loves to use deceptively difficult jumps. There's jumps where there's this one jump. I actually just decided to use the arrow rather than try to showcase how bad this jump was. Where you've got the ceiling right here, the platform's right here, and it's the edge, right? So there's the bottomless pit to your right. And you've got to grab onto this ladder over here. You have to jump over here. Because this ceiling is here, if you jump a little bit too hard, you bunk the ceiling and go straight down and you die. Believe it or not, this is a near pixel perfect jump. It's not quite pixel perfect, but it's like within 3 or 5 pixels of being a perfect jump to make this jump. It is deceptively hard. There's a jump in Starman stage where there's some spikes above you, and there's a platform, pit of spikes, and a platform. And it's just a little hop over. But because of the gravity physics, this is, again, a deceptively hard jump. It's very easy to overshoot or undershoot when trying to go through it. And Mega Man 5 does this constantly. I say, God, that's over-exaggerating. It doesn't do it constantly, but it does this appropriately because the deceptively hard jumps are always towards the end of an escalation period, towards the finalization third of the level design, right? So you always build up to that, and then it's like, now do this. And if you're paying attention, you know that's a hard jump. And if you know the arcs and you know the gameplay, you know that's a hard jump. One of the things that was said on stream, and I need to agree with this, in the past I've recommended people start the Mega Man series by playing Mega Man 5, because it's a good game, and I figured it was a good seminal game. It has most of the elements and aspects of what becomes a Mega Man game. I'd like to rescind that statement. Because Mega Man 5 is hard. Oh, it's not brutal and it's not unfair. It's hard. Actual appropriate difficulty. And again, it uses its escalation beautifully. There's one of the Wily stages where you're underwater, and you're going down, and you've got these little platforms. They're not rotating. They look like they might, and we've encountered rotating platforms before, so they're not rotating, so you jump on them cautiously, no issues. And there's a spike wall kind of up there above you, or spike ceiling, excuse me. Okay, so you jump through. And then there's a section with that but some enemies, okay. And then there's a section where there's that, but the ceiling is much shorter. Oh, and by the way, the platforms are now rotating. So you're on rotating platforms while dodging enemies, while trying not to jump too high to hit the spikes. That is the kind of difficulty that is all over the place. And again, it always builds up to it. It never just smashes you in the face with it. It never tries to gotcha. That's not true. There's one gotcha in the entire game. There's a section in one of the Wily stages, Wily 1, I believe, when you're dropping down, and you can drop down to the left or the right. Nothing indicates that that's the correct or right choice. If you drop down to the right, you're dead. There's instant spikes, you're dead. If you drop down to the left, you're fine. That's the only gotcha in the entire game. And Mega Man games usually lean a bit on gotchas, so it's kind of nice to get away from that. Another section I want to talk about is Dark Man 1. As you're going through Dark Man 1, you might think, well, this is just kind of the same kind of level design we've been seeing so far, except for the fact that it's being a lot more intelligent about how it uses its enemies. So we have enemies who their arcs and their angles of attack are, if you were to paint the screen, you could see this is a red zone, this is a red zone, this is a red zone. So there's actually no safe spot or path to travel through. You have to go through a red zone, or you have to defeat the enemies. And, well, that's okay because the weapons in this game are legit. These are some of the better weapons we've seen so far. Anybody who watched the stream knows just how much time I spent in the pause menu constantly flipping between weapons because I use them all the time. We've got the arrow, of course, which allows you to have some platforming. Great utility. As usual, the utility is baked into the arrow, rush coil, and rush jet. I said I'd talk about the rush coil. This is, in my opinion, a superior rush coil in terms of gameplay, even if it looks silly. Because the way this works is in previous games, you'd have the rush coil and you jump on it and it would bounce you up. So if you were to paint the areas you can reach with that, it would be like a little fountain going up here, right? Like that's your coverable terrain. This one, the platform itself bounces up and then you can jump off of it. This actually expands this to be a whole umbrella range that you can now reach. So your actual mobility has been increased by this seemingly small alteration to the rush coil. And there's lots of little stuff like that. I'm not going to go over every one of them because I don't want to bore you, but you get the idea. So then we have the actual weapons. So stone just makes this giant spiral around you, which is great for hitting AoE enemies or enemies that are in unusual positions. We've got the gravity crush, which is awesome. It's just a screen clearer, and it doesn't always hit every enemy, but it hits a huge number of them. There's very few invuln enemies in this game. We've got the gyro, which is kind of an improvement of the magnet missile. The magnet missile, you shot it out and then it would home up or down to an enemy. The gyro, you shoot it out and then you can hit up or down at any point in its arc to send it up or down. So now it's on you. You are in control of when it goes up or down and who it hits as a consequence thereof. And you can preface that too. Like you're fighting Crystal Man and he's jumping forward, you can do it up and then he'll rush into it as he's coming forwards, which I did on camera, for example. Crystal Man's weapon is a better version of the Gemini beam. You shoot out this big shot, but then it splits into the bunch of shots, and they are not only faster than the Gemini beam was, but also there's multiple of them, so they have a better chance of hitting things with the ricochet that's going on. And again, another good thing to hit unusual angled enemies. So there's a lot of things that allow you to hit enemies that aren't straight in front of you in this game, which is great weapon utilization, in my opinion. We have the charge slide. I already mentioned this. It's just top spin, but better. You slide and you do damage while doing it. There's a bit of invulnerability while you're doing it. Now, if you end a charge slide in an enemy, then yeah, it'll still hurt. But you can just slide through the enemy and you're fine, unlike top spin. Then we have, I'm actually losing track here. There's so many to keep track of. Wave Man. Wave Man is kind of an escalation of Snake Man's weapon. You're noticing a trend here, by the way. In that it's the same kind of thing, but it has a larger hurt box, so it hits a larger area, and it doesn't immediately go away upon hitting some enemies. It does go in hitting some other ones, and it doesn't track quite the same way, so it won't go up a wall, for example, but it will go down a wall. So it's a bit of a variation in that sense. Who am I missing? Stone. No, I did stone. Stone, wave, crystal. That's gravity. I already talked about gravity. Gravity's awesome. I love Gravity Man stage. Gyro. Is that all of them? I think that's actually all of them. Whatever. It doesn't matter if that's all of them, because my point is that the weapons are legit. And they help you to get through these stages, which now have substantially more enemies. To finish talking about that, there's another section in Darkman 2 or 3, I forget which it is, where you go up into this room and there's a staircase. So the way this works is there's a ledge over you. You're right here, and there's a staircase going up to the left, and up there, I should flip this. Staircase going up to the left, and there's a ladder up there. That's your goal. And when you walk into this room, there's no enemies active. No one's attacking you. Nothing's happening. Each one of these ladders has a turret on it, which is currently reclined. If you get too close, they'll pop up and shoot you. There's also the bat enemies up top. If you wait too long, they will wake up and they will come and home in on you. This is quietly brilliant. This is the kind of level design I absolutely gush about. Oh, it's cool to see gimmicks like Gravity Man's gravity thing, which is awesome, by the way, and I absolutely love Gravity Man's stage. It's one of my favorite stages in the whole franchise. And it is cool to see gimmicks like the bubbles that you hop on for Wave Man, or doing the wave section for Wave Man. You know, there's gimmicks are cool, and I love gimmicks when they're well done. Looking at you, X8. But these kinds of simple but clearly well thought out level design is the stuff I just absolutely geek out about. Why is this so important? Well, you're there. You're safe. For about 2 or 3 seconds, nothing happens. And if you just sit there, you have a few moments to take in the room and figure out what you're going to do. You have a moment to plan and prepare. Then these things wake up and they start homing in on you. So now you have to start moving, but there's not a huge rush. You might move to the right, which will activate the turrets, and then you have to deal with the turrets. At every stage, the waves of the enemy being able to interact with you come piecemeal. The whole room won't attack you as one. Instead, what'll happen is you'll deal with this, and then this, and then this, and then this. And there are lots of ways through that. You can just avoid your way through it. You can shoot your way through it. You can gravity crush your way through it. You can throw the stone thing and just hit unusual enemies. Same with the crystal shot. There are methods by which you can navigate this room, and you're given that moment to process before it starts hitting you in the face. Later in this very same level, there's a room where you see 6 of the homing in guys, the little orbs, and they're just sitting there. They're off at the moment they start off, and once again, you have about a second or two to process before they home in on you. Once again, you have multiple ways through this. And it's just little things like that. Thinking about where you should put the enemies in relation to the terrain and why. That is the kind of level design I love. It's the same exact thing I gushed about so much in Mega Man X1. I think we may have peaked. I think 5 and X1 are the 2 kings of Mega Man. And it's no surprise, and frankly, I'm not at all shocked. I don't know why I'm saying this twice. It is no surprise that these 2 games were being developed side by side. This is also the last Mega Man game that had weight given to it by Capcom, at least until 11. I'm not actually sure about 11. I need to research that one a little bit more, so I'm not sure about that. But I do know that 10, 9, and 8, and 7, and 6 did not have studio weight behind it. This was the last one, along with X1 over there on the side. And then the next one we'll see after this will actually be X4, as we've talked about in the future. And then finally, X5 would be the last one to actually receive studio weight. So, interesting little history lesson there. A little bit of perspective, though. Mega Man 5 didn't sell super well. Probably at least partially responsible for why that it didn't get, why the franchise was kind of put on cool a little bit, and why it didn't receive the kind of support it would, and they started kind of churning out sequels a little bit less concernedly after this. And of course, it's understandable why. After all, this game came out a full year after the SNES came out. I want to talk about that briefly, if you don't mind, because this was such a unique point in human history. That sounds grandiose. It was such a unique point in video gaming history there. That's a little bit better. Because the idea of console generations wasn't really a thing yet. We have since gone back and iterated and decided, this is this generation, this is this generation, and then we started using that going forward. We're still in that whole concept. But at the time, we weren't really thinking like that. The SNES, the SNES, was just such a weird game changer, and it was expensive to try and jump into it as a big, upfront kind of expense. And a lot of companies were kind of, we're not so sure about that until it started exploding, at which point everyone tried to jump on it, and, well, we got the SNES era, and that immediately led to the PS1 era, and I could keep going. But video game history, the point is, it's understandable why some companies stuck with the NES. After all, not everyone could afford a SNES, and a lot of people still had a NES, and so NES games would still sell, right? And despite that logic, this was the beginning of the common trend. This would go through at least until the PS2 era. I'd say we're now officially out of this particular trend, because there are still PS4 titles that sell perfectly fine, for example. But the trend is, if you release a title for console -1, when console 0 is out, then its sales flag as a consequence, simply because there's a new console out and there's just generally more marketing push for the new thing. Which is, of course, then we have X1, which sold quite well as a consequence. Go figure. What's really weird is that then Mega Man 6 after this, which is even more confusing. We'll get to that later. But nevertheless, they looked at this game, and several people on record have said they really wanted to they don't want to innovate anymore. They're like, okay, fine. I'm saying that wrong. They didn't think they could innovate anymore, which I disagree with because all the games were not out yet. Instead, they just wanted to polish what was there. This is something Zalok brought up on chat, and I wanted to kind of address this, because this is an interesting point to think about. When it comes to what I value in a review, let me walk that back. Giving a score to something, whether it's a quality in terms of a product or a service or whatever, that score is indicative of its quality, but we have to define what quality is first. And I know that sounds like a boring, stupid thing, and that's because it kind of is, but it is something that's important. If you value X and Y, but I don't, then a place that does that is going to rate higher in terms of quality for you than me. Because I just don't care about those factors, but you do. One of the things that doesn't matter to me that much when it comes to the score is innovativeness. So the Mega Man series are definitely iterative. They don't really push the envelope forward in terms of what you can do. They just kind of make the previous one, but a little bit better, or a little bit worse in some cases. Now, there's nothing wrong with that design in a vacuum. And as long as that iteration does happen and the game is better, that's what matters to me the most, that the new game is in fact superior to the previous game, that it is a better product, a better quality. But that then, if you were to take that to its logical extreme, which I absolutely think we shouldn't, that would mean then everybody should just remake the same things but a little bit better each time, which is not only unsustainable, number one, but would lead to a very, very serious stagnation in terms of creativity. Usually what happens is someone tries something new and it flops. You'll notice I usually make a point of mentioning things like that, either in the review blurbs on the website or in these very videos after the streams. And I usually mention it on stream too. Such and such tried something. It failed, but it should be given credit for the fact that it tried something, because I feel it's important to note those things. That's also why we make the distinction between innovators and codifiers. Something may innovate something new, but most innovators fail. It is the codifiers who take those concepts and then run with them and try to perform something more successful. But we still need those innovators, right? Anyways, I just wanted to address that really quick because, let's be honest, that's Mega Man 5. It's Mega Man 4, but better. It is a straight sequel, as we were talking about with that earlier terminology. I think I'm remembering that correctly. Yeah, no, that's right. Straight and indirect. Yeah, I'm right. I did want to give you a couple of the tidbits on the behind the scenes, but there's not a lot. This is a very smooth production. Like I said, this came out about a year after the SNES was out. This came out after Sonic the Hedgehog 2, for example, over on the Genesis. Mario Kart was already out at this point. Dragon Quest V and Final Fantasy V were coming out in Japan before this game came out. Give a little bit of perspective there. And they also really wanted to try and reach into the West a little bit more, which is funny for reasons that we'll get to in Mega Man 6. So they actually, for the first time, did that whole Robot Master contest in Nintendo Power. And so people outside of Japan could try and send in submissions. And none of them won. I think it's 6 is the first one. It's 6 or 8 is the first one where we had someone outside of Japan win one of those contests. I forget. I'll look it up later. Doesn't matter for this one. No, it's not this one. So they're like, okay, cool. And we put together this wonderful, awesome game. And you're probably thinking, Laura, what does this game do wrong? I only gave 1 negative to gameplay for this game. And 1 negative to story. The negative to gameplay was the refights. Same reason as always. The negative to story was the ending. The ending is what it really does wrong. We haven't talked about the story much because there's not much there, except what is there is amazing until it's terrible. It's one of the worst parts of the game. And on this axis, X1 is superior. X1 does have a better story than this game. So you start off the game. The intro is near perfect. It is a perfect cold open. If you've ever seen any of my stuff discussing television, one of the things we talk about all the time is cold opens. That's the hook. It's the first part of the episode to get you interested or invested in the episode, and then you do the title credits, and then you start the episode proper. Cold open, right? I've just mentioned that because you might not have seen my other stuff, and as usual, I'm told I need to repeat my definitions rather than assume everyone's seen everything I've ever worked on. So, the cold open of this game, the intro, is everything's cool, oh my gosh, we're under attack by someone who looks a lot like Proto Man, and now he's kidnapped Dr. Light. Why would Proto Man be doing this? Rise to pitch and title screen. It's quick, it's efficient, and it gets your attention immediately. Because up until now, Proto Man has been a mysterious, semi-helpful character. So the idea that Proto Man has gone rogue is like, okay. So we have our premise, and we have our hook, and it's excellent. Then we get to Proto Man's stage, the Dark Man stage, and it's like, okay. We got to start going through it, and, the problem here is we already did this trick with Cossack, where it worked much better. And that is the problem here. This is a straight repeat of the Cossack trick, and by the way, spoilers, we're going to repeat this trick again in the next game, and that's the problem. It's the exact same story beat. Oh, it's this other person. No, it's Wily. And they don't do anything with it. They have this great premise, this great build-up, but then it turns out it's not Proto Man all along, it was just Dark Man. Okay. Insert Batman reference here. And then we go fight Wily, and then Wily vanishes into the distance, but Proto Man saves us at the last second. Proto Man remains mysterious, Dr. Wily remains at large, the end. It falls completely flat on its face. There's no payoff, despite a decent build-up, despite decent usage of cutscenes for the NES era. This is just, okay, to be continued. It's not even to be continued, and the adventure goes on, is actually more like what this is. And it's just one screen. By contrast, Mega Man 2 did substantially more with arguably less with its ending. And this, let's be honest, this is effectively the moment in which that the Mega Man series started to lose me. And I know that sounds strange considering I've just spent the last 20 minutes doing nothing but praising this game. But the problem is, on the narrative axis, they started noticeably flagging, and would continue to do so until probably about 9 or 10. We'll debate as we get there. 11 started picking up the narrative axis again, and that's awesome. But just looking at this game, and looking at what they could have done with the story and what they absolutely decided not to do, it's so disappointing. It is, in fact, the Voyager Syndrome. Great premise, terrible execution. And I think the biggest issue here, other than the fact that they didn't know how to write a good story, looking at you, Mega Man 8, is they didn't want to do anything with the narrative. They didn't want to move forward. They just wanted it to be a comic book. Just keep going around doing the same things over and over again. Yes, I know comic books don't really do that anymore, and yes, I know they've been trying not to do that for years. You get my point. I consider that the comic book syndrome because it's just spinning your wheels. It's just another story, and then we capture and defeat the enemy, and then he goes into prison, and then he'll be back by the next issue, right? And we're done. I don't care for that, personally, and I would really substantially prefer it if we had something where the story actually moved and had status quo changes and yada yada yada. For all of my issues with the narrative of the X series, at least the X series was willing to move forward from about X4 and onwards. I wish I had more to talk about. I could, again, go into details. I could talk about nitty-gritty specifics of how there's this wonderful section where you have to be navigating on these rotating platforms above a bottomless pit, and there's spikes moving around on the platforms, but it's okay because there's actually like a recovery mechanic in the face of how they're layered on each other. So if you get hit by one, you actually have a high chance of falling back to the previous and you recover yourself. Lots of tiny little details like that are everywhere in this game. And again, just like X1, I'm not going to sit here and actually run through all those bits with you. That's what the stream's for. Really great level design. Absolutely recommend you play this game. Just not as your first one. If you want to get into the Mega Man Classic series, because I get this question all the time, I've changed my answer. Start with 2 or 4. Both of those are really good entry points, I think. Either way, I, as always, hope you've enjoyed my shark, and I will see you next time.